Hey guys, welcome to Finally Clicked, the podcast where we discuss business, leadership, and personal development. My name is Margaret Smith, and I'm the Director of Operations for Pickett Street Properties, a real estate team out of Bothell, Washington. And I'll be here every week with our owner and team leader, Joie de Vivre. We'll be digging into concepts and ideas that have helped us both personally and professionally, and you'll also get a chance to hear from local and national experts that we know provide massive value to get to the point where it all finally clicks.
Welcome, everyone, to Finally Clicked, your favorite podcast of choice in the real estate, leadership, and development realm. I, Jesse Moore, am hosting this episode with my compadre, Margaret Smith. Margaret, welcome.
Thank you. I'm flattered to be here still.
That sounded like a press kit for a university TED Talk or something. I don't know.
Well, one of our most recent compliments of the podcast was that you are like the NPR host of podcast real estates for real estate agents.
My cousins once begged me to tell a story on This American Life, which is an NPR.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Just try to paint with words, every once in a while.
Yeah, you're very poetic.
I'm an invitation.
You're an invitation, as our friend Anese just called you, which I loved.
Today we have a special guest. We have author, business consultant, Anese Cavanaugh, author of a book we've read as a team called Contagious Culture. And we booked her months ago.
Yeah, probably 4 months ago.
Been a bit of a wait for this one. So I don't want to talk too much about it in the lead-in. I think we should just get into it and then talk about it on the flip side. What do you say?
I'm game for that. Or on the backside, as we used to say.
See you on the other side.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us again for another episode of Finally Clicked. I'm here with Joie de Vivre and a special guest today, Anese Cavanaugh. And I'm really excited to have Anese on the podcast and talk a bit about, I wanted to tell you guys why she's here and how I found her. A lot of you know that I run an admin mastermind called the Pacific Northwest Admin Mastermind for real estate admin and mortgage admin. And we're always looking for new books to read, as we are for the team with Pickett Street. And one of the girls brought this book up. And when I read the cover, I was like, this is super interesting. And then I read the inside of the cover and I was more hooked because I'm very big on energy. And I realized and have always known that my energy has an impact on people and on spaces. And I'm curious to learn more about it always. And so we read it as a mastermind. And then I asked the team if we could read it too. And so it's just been interesting as a part of my journey over this last year to dig into more about how to make a bigger impact and how to be aware of how other people impact my energy and other people's energy so that we can have like this continuous happy medium. And so really excited to talk to Anese and have you guys learn more about the Iep method, the intentional energetic presence that she talks about in her book. So Anese, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay, sounds great. Well, first of all, thank you both for having me. And hi, everybody. I adore talking to you. I do. I adored it the last time we were on Instagram a couple months ago. And now, so I've been looking, like I said, I've been looking forward to this all day. So a little bit about me. I started my background actually in kinesiology. Originally, way back when I started working with athletes, and very, very, very long story short, which I'm happy to share any of. I moved into working with leaders and working in leadership development, coaching people around their performance, coaching people around how they were creating impact, and did all this, did a lot of one-on-one coaching, did a lot of organizational consulting, and very, very, very long story short, started to realize that the thing that people were leaving out was paying attention to the quote unquote soft stuff, like their intentions, their energy, and their presence, and how they were showing up. And so over the last 20 years, I've developed a methodology called the Iep Method, which stands for Intentional Energetic Presence, which now gets shared, around the country for sure, and then in some parts of the world, to help people have better impact, feel better energetically, and then do really good stuff with that.
Well, so I'll jump in here and ask, can you help us define energy? Because between the three of us, if we did it independently, we get a different answer.
Yeah.
If I asked Margaret, she'd say that it's the mother spirit that she follows.
So true.
And as we talk to you with this, ribbons of pale smoke floating in front of you, as if we're on a vision quest, I myself can be a little bit more pragmatic about energy. And so can you help us define what you mean by energy?
Sure. So for me personally, the way I look at energy is it's basically how do I feel and how do I make other people feel, and am I in tune to the things that are unseeable that are having an impact on whatever's happening in a room. So that's one way of looking at energy, is just how do we feel? How do we have the energy and the stamina physically to do stuff? And then what is it we pick up on? Like, everybody listening to this can relate to being in a grocery store or being anywhere, and they're hanging out with somebody and all of a sudden they start to feel tired, or they walk into a room and the room feels really contracted and tight. That's energy. We're walking into an energetic field. So if I look at it, for me personally, I just look at it as how do I feel? What am I putting out there? And am I contributing to the energetic field in a way that is helpful or not? You can also look at energy, if we want to look at it scientifically, as like ATP, which is the energy of the body and how our cells lies. And like there's a whole scientific part about it, which actually in the next book, Contagious, there's an entire chapter, which Jesse, I think maybe I wrote it for you. Now talk about this. I didn't know it then, but I think that might be your chapter, which is the science of showing up. And I talk a lot about energy production and how that builds in. But really, at the end of the day, it's like, do you feel good? Do you have the energy and the stamina to do what you want to do? And are you showing up in a way that actually makes people want to follow you, work with you, and actually helps things go better? So does that help, Jesse?
It does help. I mean, and I would expect that from you. I would expect a helpful answer. Your book is it seems like a fundamental guide to energy work, about your controlling your energy and how your energy has an impact in general. And so you break things down on you make it very simple for everybody to kind of utilize.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that. I gave it my best for sure. I think that all of us have got this sixth sense about energy. Like, I think every human being has got the ability to read energy, feel energy, and then also be intentional with the energy. I think some of us are more sensitive to it than others. And I think that it's really important to be able to make it as simple as possible so that people start to understand that they do have command over their energy, or whatever they want to call it, and what they're actually putting out there. Some people would think about energy as presence. What is the presence they're actually holding? Some people would look at it really, truly in the physical sense of how much energy do they have to do the things that they want to do. And so in Contagious Culture, and then also in the next one, in this entire body of work, actually, I've done my very best to speak to it in different ways that are relatable, whether you're in business or you're an athlete or you're totally woo-woo with smoke coming out and what did you call it?
Vision quest.
Vision quest.
And I feel like I just want to be clear for the people listening to this. Before I got on the call with them, I have these little cones, these incense cones that I adore, and I lit one 5 minutes before, thinking that it would go out before, but it must be the energy on this call. It's going and going and going.
Well, now that you've explained it, I was hoping people would think you were in a teepee. And...
that could be true. They'll never know. They won't know unless they see this.
I think what Jesse said about the simplicity of the book is what I love so much, because what I've known about myself, and actually Jesse is, as funny as he is, he's totally an energy seeker. And that's one of the reasons from the very first interview he had with me, he said he was hiring me and he needed me to be the light bulb for the team. Yeah. So even if we can't describe it in scientific terms to people who maybe aren't into, I don't even call it woo-woo, into things that they can't see, it is very palpable. And I've had countless people tell me they feel better when they're in a room with me. I can sit with someone in a room and literally feel like I'm, like a water bottle, and they're literally sucking the water out of me. A very visual, because someone who is going to drain me is literally someone who doesn't have any energy to give back to. It's very different from literally having the energy to do a task or to run a mile, or it's very different feeling than that. And so I think your book puts it in layman's terms for people that maybe don't have any idea what that looks like or feels like.
For sure. And here's the other thing. To be really clear, scientifically, energy, they have defined it. Like, it can be defined. So there is they've done studies with, for example, Heart Math Institute has done studies where they find that we literally have an energetic field that we're projecting, where people can feel what we're putting out there. So there is scientific backing for all of this. The way that I like to talk about it, and the way that I like to just work with people in it, is just in the simplest part, which is what you're talking about, Margaret, is how are you making people feel? And as a leader, when you're out in your life, or as a parent, or as a friend, like, do you bring the vibration of a room up? Do you bring the vibration of the dynamic up? Or are you somebody that's the lowest energy in the room, and therefore you're like sucking the life out of everybody that you meet? And we have control over that. So what I find is that 70% of this is an awareness. The minute I have awareness that I'm the lowest vibration in the room, or what I call George or Georgette, that I'm the lowest vibration in the room, as soon as I have that awareness, if I want to change it, there are things I can do to start to show up more effectively. But I have to be aware of it, and I also have to want to change it.
Poor George. What did George do to you?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so actually the George thing is a really good story. So
is it actually a real person?
No, it's not. He's my imaginary friend. He is named George because up until I wrote Contagious, I had never met a George in my entire life. So when I teach or when I speak, I'll give examples, and I always have a pick on person. And so I would pick on somebody, and I was like, it's not good to pick on this person in the front row. So I started to make George be my imaginary friend on stage with me. And I just intuitively came up with his name, and it's worked out really, really well for many years, because I literally, I would say, is there anybody named George in the room? They go, no. Well, now the more I'm doing this work and the more people I meet, I'm starting to like see more Georges. But George and Georgette, or G, whichever one you call them, that is the main character in Contagious You that I talk about with this. And that has been my quote unquote pick on person the whole time. But yes, poor George. Now I keep meeting George. Now I've met like 4 Georges in the last month, and I'm like, uh-oh, it's all good. It's all good.
I think one of the things that caught me right in the beginning of the book was, I wrote down a couple of quotes. That we are contagious. When we lean into it, we ripple. And that's not the full quote, but essentially the concept of creating a ripple. I totally understand that. And I think I'm just, a topic that I'm wrestling around with a couple people is that there are so many people in leadership that have no idea how their energy impacts people. Yeah. And they may have really great emotional intelligence or the ability to like make really great business decisions, but they actually, like some of your examples of the stories in the book, where they're not actually going to reach any sort of point of success, because without all of it, they can't reach their full potential. And so I've always been one to think that I was not meant to be in leadership beyond a certain point, because I didn't have the business acumen or like the skills that I couldn't attain. But I'm wondering what was your plan with this book before you wrote it? Did you plan on going in and talking to leadership and across industries, or did you even have a plan like that?
Oh, well, so that's a great question. I did it backwards. So I was actually working in this field and building out this methodology for years before I wrote the book. The reason why I wrote the book was because it got to the point where every time I would speak or teach, people would be like, where is the book? How can I get this to the rest of my people? And so I actually, a lot of people write the book and then they go and they teach the methodology. I created the methodology, worked with a ton of clients in corporate, and then I wrote the book to support it. So, does that help? Like with
yeah, totally. I was thinking about how you how that happens. So that does make sense. And then, so did you see that was missing in leadership, I guess, before when you started? Yeah.
Totally. So completely, because you actually just spoke to Margaret. So you were thinking you can only go so far in your leadership because you don't have the skills or whatever you're making up leadership is, right? What I have seen, I've been working with leaders for a little over almost 20 years. And I've worked in almost every industry: finance, healthcare, engineer. Like it does not matter. It does not matter the industry. What I have noticed is that no matter where the person is in their career, what actually stops them from going far in their leadership is their energy, their intentions, their energy, and their presence and what they're bringing to it. Because all of us know people who've got their MBAs or PhDs. They may be even making a ton of money for the company. They might be the CEO of the company. But what you're talking about, their energy is so low or it's negative that they're leaving dead bodies everywhere they go, or they're burning people out, or people just don't feel inspired to follow them. So they're a leader because they've got that position, but they're not actually a leader because people want to follow them. They're not a leader because they're inspiring people by the way that they show up. So someone like you who's saying, oh gosh, I think I can only go so far, but my energy is really good. I actually would flip that around and say, no, actually, the energy thing is the hardest thing to get. If you can get that right, then your skills on top of it, that's actually the easier piece. Does that make sense? So,
Yeah.
So what I was seeing was I was noticing that, and actually this is a really good example. So in 2009, I was working with a company, and this is before I had named the work the Iep Method. And I remember in 2009, I was working with a company, and very long story short, I just kept noticing that these leaders would come to me and they'd be like, okay, I've got my PhD, I've got my MBA from Stanford, like I'm ready to go. And then they would have all this conflict, or they wouldn't be getting the results that they wanted to get in their team, or their culture wasn't what they wanted it to be. And I started to notice, like, oh, you know what the missing ingredient is here? 99% of the issue, 99%, somewhere in there, of the issue is actually, it's how they're showing up. They're either totally exhausted, or they're just not conscious. They're not present with people. They're not clear on their intentions. You know, like whatever it is, it's your IEP is what I call it, your intentions, your energy, and your presence. Those things weren't in alignment. And so therefore they could have all these amazing skills and all these degrees behind them, but if they weren't showing up well, they could only go so far. So I was going into companies and I was talking about your energy, your presence, your intentions, like all these different pieces. And the companies would say to me, oh, that's really great, Anese. We love that. But that is the soft stuff. Like, we don't really have time to talk about intentions and energy and presence. Like, that's really great. You're from California, but we're not going to do that. I was actually, for the record, from Chicago at that time. But anyway, and so there was a company that, and so then a lot of times what I would do is, in order to meet them where they were at, I'd go, okay, great. Well, let's do traditional leadership development. Let's do your leadership development. Let's do communication. Let's do feedback training, all this stuff. And then I would kind of like sneak Trojan horse this content in to help people be more effective at doing it, and the methodology. And the feedback we would get is people would go, there's something special about what you're doing, but we don't know what it is, but don't give us the soft stuff. Well, it was the soft stuff that was getting integrated. So, but I was still, up until 2009, I was still pretty flexible with the way I talked about it. And I'm also really lenient with not being a strong stand for it. So in 2009, I had a client and I was doing some work with them, and they were a hard no to the IEP work. They were a hard no to like talk about the soft stuff, the essential you that I talk about in the book, From the Inside Out. They just wanted the skills. And so for a month, we went ahead and we worked the way that they wanted to work. And it didn't matter how much I was giving them good models to work with from a leadership standpoint. I was noticing that the energy was actually the thing that was getting in the way for them. So I went back to the company and I said, hey, to the stakeholders, and I said, hey, I actually am bordering being out of integrity now, because I see that we need to bring this other piece in. So I either need to bring this other piece in and start using this with the group, or I'm going to refer you to somebody else who will work with them in the way you want them to work with. Like, I was, at that point, I was completely unattached to it. And they're like, okay, great, bring it in. We're invested, bring it in. Brought it in. About a month and a half later, they come to me and they said, Anese, you really let us down. Like, you really let us down. And I remember going, oh my God, how did I let you guys down? I thought things were going really well, because I was seeing things shift. It's like, well, how did I let you down? And they said, well, if you would have stood stronger for your body of work, and if you would have stood stronger, even in my energetic presence, about the stand I was taking for the IEP work, they said we would have saved 2 months of time, because once you started bringing that in, it totally unlocked this whole team and they were able to do things differently.
Wow.
Do you follow that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it was a huge lesson for me, and that was 2009. So I started my consultancy in 2002. And so that was 2009, and I was raising my babies, and I was also building out the work. In 2009, when that happened, I remember I left. I had that feeling in my chest where I was like totally contracted. I felt like I got superbly busted. I remember having tears in the back of my eyes, like, oh my God, I wasn't mad at the situation or them. I was mad at myself, because I knew that I had not stood for it. But the gift of that was that I walked out of that building that day, got in my car, and I was like, we're done here. Like, I am now going to stand in the IEP work. We're going to build it out. I went back, I told my team, we ended up letting 50% of our clients go that didn't want to do the work using the IEP stuff. We actually referred them out. The rest we kept. And then from there, 2009 on, that's when the work really started to take off. So the reason why I show that very, very long story is that to me, there's two parts of it. To me, it was one of the most powerful experience I've ever had about how my intentions, energy and presence had to be in alignment to create the impact I wanted to create. And they weren't. I was still soft on it. I was still like feeling it out. So as soon as I got clear on that, like that's when my business started to take off more. The other reason why I share it is because that is a perfect example of a company who's like, nope, we don't want the soft stuff. It's not about the energy, it's about the skills. And then finally, when we get that in there, they see such a significant shift that it opens up what they can do with their team. But that was about the energy. That was not about their skills around communication.
Can you define real quick the difference between hard stuff and soft stuff as you mean it?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. That's great. So typically speaking, people think of like the hard stuff like, we're going to do some visioning and some strategy. We're going to look at our spreadsheets. We're going to look at our communication. We're going to do a feedback skills training. So I'm going to teach you guys right now how to do feedback. We're going to, even culture building can be the hard stuff. We're going to get foosball tables and we're going to do karaoke nights and we're going to, have free lunches. Like that's all tangible hard stuff. The soft stuff or the stuff you can't see. It's and what a lot of people think of the soft stuff is like anything that's coming from like vulnerability or, all that woo-woo stuff that a lot of people think does not have a place in business, which I actually think is very, very, very much changing. Like I already see a huge change in the last 5 years in terms of companies' tolerances for vulnerability and, some of the soft stuff. But what I've come to at this point is I look at that soft stuff as titanium. Like it is the thing that is underneath every single action we do. It's like food coloring in water. You can't take energy out. You can't take food coloring out of the water. Once it's in the water, like it's there, it colors everything. So it's similar to if my energy is not good and I'm having a feedback conversation or I'm doing a sales conversation or I'm leading a team meeting and my energy is not clean and I'm projecting stuff that's not helpful, I don't care how brilliant I am or how good I am and all that hard stuff skills, I'm not going to have the impact I want to have. And I actually might more likely make things even worse. So
it seems like there's no shortage of clients for you to work with. When you think about the corporate environment of the past 20 years, which has been, I think, heavily weighted towards the tangibles, like you're talking about, the ping pong tables and the dog beds and the snack rooms and all of that stuff. Whereas, I think that's easy. It's easy to sell those things because they are hard items, right? Like there's a value to those things.
Completely.
Or they fill a resume, or you can put a bullet point in front of it. How do you take energy work? I guess I was sitting here listening to you talk, and I'm wondering how you go into a corporate culture cold and generate awareness enough to the point where people are willing to listen up to this.
That's the $1 million question. Like it's such a good question because you make such a good point is that people like things that are familiar, that they can touch, that they can put on a checklist and go, okay, great, we did this. We got a foosball table, we did this. We've got our team bonding nights on Tuesday. Okay, great, we've got a good culture now. They like the checklist. So I totally get that. And I also want to say all of that stuff is super important. So the hard stuff, the skills, everything we're talking about, the feedback, the culture, like super, super, super important. It's just that if you're missing paying attention to a person's intentions, energy, and presence, or an organization's intentions, energy, and presence, if you're missing that piece, at best, you're leaving a ton of possibility on the table. Like you're leaving a lot on the table. And at worst, you're actually probably making things worse, as I said earlier. So going in cold is really interesting. Some companies are superbly not up for this still. Some companies, like I know that I'm not for everybody. I know this work is not for everybody. Some companies, I've met with them. I'll go in and they'll just go, we're good where we're at. And we don't need to bring in any of the soft stuff because we've got our checklist and we've got our culture checklist and we're doing everything and we're super, super good. Those companies are often the companies who their executives will come and hire me privately to help them figure out how they can show it better or how they can actually exit the company. So that's a trend I've started seeing in the last couple of years, is that I'm getting more and more people from companies like that who are not interested in the soft stuff, who are coming to me and going, help me either change the culture from the inside out, starting with me first, or help me figure out what I'm going to do next. So that's one thing. Then there are other companies that are kind of in the middle of it, Jesse, and they're like, all right, we're not really sure, but we're willing to give this a chance. And the way that I go in cold with that is I give them an experience. So the best way for me to do this work with anybody is, one, they either read the book and then they are like, whoa, this is interesting. Let's talk about it. They talk about it as a group and they go, okay, let's have her come in. That's a really, really lovely way to do it. The other way is, a lot of times I'll give talks or keynotes and somebody in the audience will be from an organization. They'll have the experience in their body of actually feeling incredibly present and noticing the energetic dynamics at play. And then from there, they'll go back to their company and say, hey, we should look at bringing this in. This is very interesting. So that's kind of a lead in from people who get exposed outside of it. If I'm going, like you guys are a company, I'm coming in cold and you're a little bit open to it, but you're not really sure, the way that we'll do it is we'll talk about, like, I'll ask you guys questions like, are you having the impact that you want to have? Do you feel the way you want to feel? Are people following you and working with you because they want to or because they have to? You know, what culture are you personally creating? And also, are you guys in alignment with your core values? And if you look at those 5 questions, most people, if they're being honest, they can't answer all 5 of those in the positive 100%. What I find is those are the 5 magic questions that help us start to look at, okay, there's something in the IEP work for you guys. Would you be willing to experiment with it? And so it really is getting them into the experience of it and then asking really good questions.
Okay, new question based on that response.
Yeah.
I think our team, we provide a culture that's very, very well defined. It's not well defined by the people outside of us. Like, you know, we work in an office of about 250 other real estate agents. I think a lot of them don't know. They know of us, but they don't know why it works necessarily. And then as people join the team, they find out very quickly, like in less than a week's time to 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
They start seeing direct changes in their life, not just professionally, but personally.
Yes.
So
Yes.
how do we now market our culture? How do we now extend what we have on the team, inside the team? How do we market that so that it's better known outside of the team?
Are you talking about for recruiting people, or are you talking about for your marketing and how amazing you guys are?
On recruiting people primarily, because here's the example in my head is we had a team meeting just recently, and a new team member got a little bit emotional about how much his life and perspective had changed, and how it's affecting every area of his life, including his relationships with his family members. And I'm like, that's the kind of change I want to impact. Yeah. That's the kind of change I want to affect in people in general, right? But I don't want to do it one person at a time. I want to do it on a bigger scale than that. Like, and that means we want to recruit more people. Right. And we want to use this culture to do that.
Well, so I mean, I would say, so the question is, how do you start to communicate that outside of your culture to people who are thinking about coming to work?
Right. I mean, let me say it this way. I don't want to call us a cult. I don't want to be culty or cultish, but I mean, isn't that one of the problems? Is how do you take that message where believers already believe it, right? There are people that have embraced it. You see radical changes inside of them. How do you then use that in a healthy, constructive way?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that keeps popping up to me, and you can stop me if you guys have already thought about this, but I keep imagining you guys just doing a simple cultural piece, you know, like a PDF or even a video that talks with as many people as possible, talking about like what it's like to work with your organization and what are some of the special things. I could see there being a culture, like a marketing piece almost. It could be a video, it could be PDF. I could also see you guys building some of this into interviewing questions, like when you're out talking to people, kind of reverse engineering what are the kinds of people you want to attract to your company and what kind of questions do you need to ask in order to see if those are the people that are going to fit or not be a cultural fit, but actually a cultural add. That makes
When
sense.
yeah, and when you go into a company and they start to embrace your ideas and start to utilize
Yeah.
your exercises, do you see them making changes in their business beyond internal processes? Do you see them?
I see, here's one of the most common things that we see happen is that the clients that we go that integrate this work and they start to embody it amongst themselves as a team, their clients outside start to go, what are you guys doing? It feels really good to work with you. How do I get a taste of that? So it's incredibly contagious, right? So it has to start. It's funny because for me, this work has to start from the inside out with each in person individually, which is why Contagious You is the follow-on to Contagious Culture, because it's like, no kidding, we've got to look at ourselves first. So like for all of your employees that are in your company, they're working on their own Contagious You. They're working on how they show up. Now a culture is only a bunch of contagious yous hanging out together. That's it. So then if you've got every employee or even 30% of your employees, ironically, that's the number I'm starting to really notice. It's like even 30% of your team being a positively and usefully, because that's a really important distinction. You could be very positively contagious and completely unuseful. So being positively and usefully contagious, even 30% can start to create a ripple and a culture change. Even one person can do that, but if you have 30%, that's even better. So if you have that, then that starts to catch on, and then your clients will start to catch on, and it does ripple out other departments and whatnot. I think that I had a company. It's interesting that you're asking this question, because I had a company a couple of weeks ago that was looking at, like, they really want to define their culture and they really want to be different in their culture and everything, and they kept trying to define culture. And what they found was that really the answer, they were working so hard and trying to spend so much money to like get all these brand people to like tell them how to define their culture. And they're like, you know what, really, our culture is just how we feel. And so they found that if they just started talking about how they felt and they just embodied that, then that became contagious, and they don't need to do a lot of messaging because people are picking up on, like, wow, Margaret's really, she lights up the room when she comes in. I don't know what her deal is or what their culture is, but I sure know I like hanging out with her. Let me go check that company out.
No, you just reminded me of something that I knew and that we've done before, and that I think that's something that's true that you often forget. One of my business coaches once said that successful people always stop doing what made them successful in the first place. Yeah. And you have to go back to that.
Yes.
And I mean, there was a time where we took what we learned from like books like Fierce Conversation or Leadership and Self-Deception, and then we would do workshops for our clients so our clients could integrate it in their businesses.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a genius way of advertising your culture and really using your culture as a tool.
I think I love it that we're talking about this, because I think that you're bringing up something that's been on my mind lately, which is how complicated we like to make things now, and how the way we try and make things complicated and put all these frameworks and branding and all these things around it then it makes us more busy, and then we get so busy we can't actually be present, and then we're disconnected from why we did anything in the first place. And I keep sending people, and myself included, back to the basics of like, okay, wait a minute, how do I feel? What's important to me? What kind of a culture do I want to create? Because if every single employee in your culture is conscious of that question, like, what kind of culture do I want to create and how do I want to show up? You have it. Culture will take care of itself, because nobody wants a crappy culture. Like nobody, I mean, not many, I mean, I'm sure there are people that might, but I don't know. I don't hang out with those people. Like nobody wants a crappy culture. Nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, you know what, I'm going to show up really bad. I'm going to really hate my job today, and I'm going to really make it miserable. Most people don't want that, but they're so busy because things have gotten so complicated. They forget that they have absolute agency over how we show up, and therefore what kind of a culture do we want to create. And that is the soft stuff, Jesse. Like that's the stuff that, like, I can't give it to you in a hard, I'm gonna show you things like that.
Do you think it's on, if someone is in a company and they don't feel like they can affect change as far as energetic change, is that a leadership issue? The thing that comes to mind is, I don't know if you've seen the series from Showtime called Succession. Do you have any awareness of it? Well, it follows like old money. So it's like Rupert Murdoch. It's like the main character is like Rupert Murdoch, right? Where he owns a media conglomerate and he's a billionaire, and he does things his way, and it's kind of, he belittles everybody, you know. And so when I think of an environment that has like a caustic culture, that's what I think, right? Yeah. And it's to the point where he tells people to like bark, right? Like he tells his underlings to bark just because he can.
Wow.
And I can see people being in situations where they may not feel like they can affect change. Yeah. And in those situations, do you think that's a leadership problem then, where you have to you have to change the mind of leadership to get it to trickle down?
Gosh, that's a complex question. I mean, here's the thing: if I'm working for Rupert Murdoch, or what's his name, Rupert Murdoch, and he's having me bark, and I continue to stay in that company, and I can't change Rupert Murdoch, like I can't. So here's the thing. Let me go back. Let me backtrack a little bit. Here's the thing: we cannot change anybody. We can only change ourselves. So in that case, if I'm going to put myself in that scenario where I'm working for Rupert, and he's telling me to bark, I'm going to look at, all right, how do I want to show up with this? Does that feel good to me? Is that in alignment with me? Well, no, it's not. If I continue to work there and I make a request to Rupert, hey, Rupert, I got to let you know, like some feedback for you. When you have me bark, I don't feel that inspired. Right? So I have a leadership responsibility as the employee, as a human being, as a person having agency over myself. Because this is the thing, it doesn't matter what level we are of a leader, we are all leaders in our own life. So in that case, even though he's my boss, I still have responsibility to check in with myself and go, you know what, that doesn't feel good to me. I am going to stand for myself at this one. I'm going to give him some feedback. Hey, Rupert, barking doesn't work for me. Don't like it, do it. Here's a recommendation of how we should do this different. If Rupert is like, nope, Anese, you're going to bark like a dog and in order to keep your job, now I have a choice of if I want to keep that job or not. I can't change him. I can change myself. So it's funny because in Contagious, you and Margaret, I think you'll really appreciate this one because I talk a lot about George, and there's actually a chapter in there called like, what about that guy? Which is how do you navigate Rupert, basically. No, we might need to change his name. Maybe
You're Rupert.
How do you navigate that guy? And I actually share a story of a company where this did not work out. And the person, Rupert, did not want to change, and that was just fine. And what ends up happening is people will start to exit the company, and they'll take people with them, or people will stay and they'll burn out and get exhausted and like all these other things. So in that case, like if I cannot impact the energy of my organization, and my organization is toxic, or my team is toxic, or my marriage is toxic, or whatever, the first place I need to look at is what do I need to do for myself? How am I showing up? How am I contributing to this? Have I given feedback about what I want it to be different? Have I done everything I can? And if I've done everything I can, and only I will know that, we know that for ourselves. If I've truly done everything I can, and I've really looked at how I might be contributing to the dynamic, and it still is not going to change, then the way I'm contributing is I'm contributing by staying. So then it's up to me to take care of myself and to actually leave. Mm-hmm. So, but
it reminded me of like, it's leading up is another concept that they use in a lot of books. And in an ideal world, I would like everything to come from the top per se. Like we have our organizational chart sideways or horizontal so that, because we're all kind of, we see each other all on the same level. Yes, Jesse's the owner and the primary leader in that way, but we all have a responsibility to take ownership and be a part of that. And ideally, in an ideal world, I would love for it to all come from the people who started the company and all of that. But I've realized, because I've been experimenting essentially with people, that I can impact anyone at any level of leadership in any organization. But I think you said it well, with whether or not they want to like be open to that and accept it is what will make it successful or not. Yeah. And ultimately, that's why I left the last place I was working at, was I could impact, and I impacted a lot of people. But if it's a big enough company where there's a number of people who impact so much of the feeling space, I guess I'd call it, like, then it's not a good use of my energy, because I need, if I'm around people that want the same thing, and even if they don't know how to do it, energy work or have a presence, if I can teach them how to do it, it's incredibly contagious, which is, I think, what's like why I related so much to your book, because I've been here long enough to see us cycle through groups of people. And for the first time since I've gotten here, I feel like we have a group of people who can replicate the same energy and can then go out and talk about it on social media or talk about it with their family. And we don't have to tell them to do that, because they're just wanting to do it.
Right. Right. I think it's also I love that, and I love it that I love it that you've been able to see the cycles and like really be playing with that and watching that and the way you're holding it, because I think the other thing that's really important is, like, if we look at a Rupert. Now Rupert might be his own animal, right? I mean, generally speaking, I'm going to go back to George because George is my guy. Generally speaking, okay, even if somebody is leading badly and they're bringing really toxic behaviors to the organization, there's a really good reason that that's happening. So in that case, that's a kind of conversation where if George is open to it, I'm going to go have a conversation with him and his team about the culture and what's going on. And hey, what do you guys think the impact of having your employees bark like dogs is? Like, what do you think the impact is of the culture that you're creating? Do people work here because they want to or they don't want to? You can apply those questions at any level. And what I find is when I get into a room one-on-one with a Rupert, if he and I can sit down, there are questions that I can ask him that can have him start to relax a little bit. Maybe not Rupert with your show, but that can have him relax a little bit and feel a little bit more safe space to talk about whatever's going on for him. Because most times when people are leading like that, there is something big going on. Like, they're coming from fear. They have a ton of pressure on them. They've got problems at home. They've got some wound that they have not healed. So they actually need a little bit extra support in the form of therapy or something. Like, there's a reason. We all do the stuff that we do for a reason. And so the other thing I think is really important about creating a contagious culture and showing up as best we can is to also give those people who are quote unquote toxic leaders a little bit of grace and to get curious about what's going on and have empathy around it. And then be willing to get into the conversation. If they're not willing to get in the conversation and they're super mean or you're not safe or whatever, by all means, like, you got to take care of yourself. But I also want to invite everyone to just start looking at, generally speaking, if someone's showing up like a jerk, it's not because they're a jerk. There's something else going on. And so if we can give them a little bit of space and grace, sometimes that in itself is enough to open things up and start to shift the culture.
Yeah. Can you tell, like, you don't have to give names or anything, of course, but do you have an example of a George or a Rupert that you saw was going to be a hard no? And then did you literally see them make change, like take a corner, make a change to actually embrace this work?
Yeah, I did. I numbers.
I'm sure you've seen, I'm sure you've seen a lot.
So there a couple come to mind. So I can remember working with somebody who this work was forced upon them. They were an executive in their company and the work was forced upon them because it was a condition of them staying. So they're what I call a hostage client, which I don't normally do hostages, but I was intrigued, and I also could see this person. I could also see this person as one of my superpowers is I can see the human in anything, and so I could also see, like, that's not the impact that they wanted to have. So they were a hard stop. However, they were hostaged into it with me. And we went and we spent a day together doing work. And they literally said at the very beginning, I'm doing this to check this off the list, but I want nothing to do with it. And so in that conversation, it was like, all right, great. So then it becomes my job as a co-human being in that to go, okay, great. Well, we're together. Let's hang out. Let's go hike. So we ended up going hiking. And So that's another kind of a good little hack, is you get people into their bodies and moving, as opposed to sitting in a room with four walls and that helps too. But what ended up happening for this person is their realization where they shifted was, I asked the question of, is this the impact that you want to have? And if you were to leave the company tomorrow, you would take yourself with you. So is how you're showing up now, is this how you want to show up in your next organization? And there was something about that question for them where all of a sudden they realized, like, it gave it a little bit of light. It like put a little bit of a crack in the light where they were able to kind of go, well, actually, no, I don't want to be known as somebody who's forced to get executive coaching, who nobody wants to work with. Like, that's not actually the impact I want to have. But what it took to get there, you guys, was a couple of hours of holding a sacred space that was not judgmental, that was actually seeing them as a human being, and that was willing to get really curious about, like, well, okay, if we're quote unquote forced to be in this thing together for a day, like, let's at least talk about what is the impact you want to have. So that was one. That person actually ended up going on. They stayed with the company for a couple more years. They did eventually end up leaving. but that was one. And then there have been others who've just said, like, I'm not going to do this. This is ridiculous. And then they come out of it 3 weeks later and they're like, okay, this is one of the best things I've ever done in my life, because they get in touch with something like gratitude, you know, or a lot of times the shifter for people is they start to realize the impact they're having at home. So, and I talk a lot about this in this next one, because I didn't talk enough, I don't think, about the dynamics that are actually happening at home in the first book, because I didn't realize how important they were to an organizational health, is what's actually happening at home with people's personal relationships. And so sometimes if a person is having a hard time leading at work, if you can get them to start to see how that's actually affecting their marriage, their sleep, their relationship with their kids, their health, their weight, all of a sudden that starts to crack open little things where, like, okay, wait, that's actually not the person I want to be. And then the final thing I would offer with that one is just the question of, what are you committed to? You know, just ask anybody, George, Sally, whoever. It's like, what are you truly committed to in your life? And nobody is committed to being a bad leader. Nobody's committed to that. So if you give somebody, the space and the grace to ponder that question, and it's like, okay, if you're committed to X, then how do you need to show up in order to create that? That's a really beautiful conversation. So it's little pieces. And then there have been organizations, Margaret, who've been like hard stuff. We just had a financial organization we worked with last year that ended up putting like 250 people through this work, and came out, and at first they were like, I don't know about this, and then they came out and they said that this work actually was what helped them unlock their return on investment for all the other training they'd been doing before, because they'd been spending all this money on all this other hard skills leadership development, but people were just doing the training versus actually being it and being clean in their intentions, their energy, and their presence. So as soon as they actually started to look at, how am I showing up, and am I showing up in a way that's actually helping these go well, as soon as they integrated this, all of a sudden, all that awesome training that they've been doing for all these years, they were able to access it in a different way. So everyone is different.
You brought up, because I remembered from our conversation on Instagram, your kids, and because I know a lot of our listeners have kids, how have you used this work with your kids and people at home?
I am not married anymore. I was with my ex for 18 years. We split up about almost 5 years ago. And I will tell you that when we split up, we went through mediation, and the mediator said that our divorce was the most respectful, intentional divorce she'd ever mediated. And a lot of that, I give credit to this work, and me being clear about my intentions, my energy, my presence. And then also my ex and I being really clear about what was our shared intention navigating the divorce, which our shared intention was that he and I have a good relationship, which we do, and that our kids are safe and feel loved and aren't, brutalized by it. So that's how I've used it at home. I've had people, ironically, people are always having conflict in their marriages and sometimes ending them, but I've had people use this work to actually navigate their divorce process, or even how they were going to tell their in-laws and how we're going to do it. And they're paying attention to all the different dynamics and what is the energy they're bringing to the conversation. So that's kind of like the really adult version of it. The kids, I have a 14-year-old and a 19-year-old now. My 19-year-old just went off to college. He has literally grown up with this work. Like, you guys can't see it, but behind me, I've got his first sign that he drew for the company, and it's totally spelled wrong, and it is on cardboard, and then he sold it to me for 50 cents. And I love it. I love it. So, like, I'll have it forever. But he's grown up with this work, and I think, and so is my daughter, who's 14, and I think that they've kind of gotten it, like, they're so used to it now, it doesn't really faze them. And then they'll say, like, my daughter will go, IEP doesn't work for 5-year-olds or whatever, like, I can remember conversations like that. But I think that I hope that it's given them an extra level of awareness around how they show up. When they were younger, we used to do games, like we would do the gratitude game, we'd do the intention game. Like, on the way to school, we'd go, okay, what are your intentions for today? And the way home from school, we go, all right, what are you grateful for today? So it's just been like peppered in quietly. I think the biggest thing that I personally use from this body of work is the 5 steps to intentional impact and the reboot. So when I've got to go have a really serious conversation with my 14-year-old about something that's kind of high stakes for a 14-year-old, or she and I are arguing about something, that to me is high stakes. And so I want to be really clean in my own energy and make sure I'm not projecting my stuff on her, or that I'm not triggered about something and projecting it on her. And so when I go into that conversation, it's my job as a parent to reboot, take a deep breath, get really present, and then get really clear. What are my intentions for this conversation? What energy am I bringing? And then how am I going to show up in this conversation? And that 5 steps, that 5-step framework that's in the book, will help me really go through and look at, all right, well, what do I need to believe? How do I need to do this? What do I actually need to say? And that has saved my booty several times, I think, in my parenting. But it's not perfect. I'm a work in progress, but it does help me a lot.
So just out of curiosity, other than the book, like, how do you, and then obviously you do consulting work, but do you offer like a workshop, or how do you make it accessible at a deeper level to people?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking that. So I do. Okay. I set an intention a couple of years ago where I wanted every single person to be able to access IEP, whether for free or they could spend a ton of money. Like, they're welcome to do any scale. And so now if you can get access to a printer or the internet, you can download free resources. And they're IEP.io is where your people can get them. So if you go to IEP.io, you can download a virtual presence kit. You can download like just a bunch of stuff. I'm sure, Margaret, you've seen it. Then there's other ways, like we have products, we have online programs. So we have an online IEP school. So if you want to go through the IEP methodology, but you don't want to come spend time with me for a couple days in a room, you can just do IEP school. We have a program called Project Impeccable, which is an online program that people can do. It's self-paced. It's 60 days of IEP, basically. And then we have like our 2-day workshops that I'm actually running one in a couple weeks out here in California. We do 2 days. It's an immersion. I limit it to no more than 32 people in the room. And I just go deep with people for 2 days, really embodying the work, learning the methodology. A lot of times, like in this one coming up in October, we have a team of 10 people coming, a team of 4, another team of 4, and then the rest are all independent business leaders from different companies. That one we'll also go in and do privately for companies if they want to bring me in. And then there is consulting, and then I speak. My primary focus areas right now are speaking and going to reach as many people as possible, and then I lead these 2-day events. And then a little bit of consulting. I've lightened up my consulting. I'm still available for it. I've like in the big scheme of things, I'm dividing my time up. So does that answer your question? That's a big answer, right? I told you.
Do you do workshops outside of California, outside of your area?
Yeah, yes, we do. Well, we do an annual one in Ann Arbor, Michigan, because we have a really fun group of, like, we have a fun following out there with University of Michigan and Zingerman's and all those guys. We do one in Ann Arbor, which is usually in the summer. And then we do one usually in Sacramento or San Francisco in the fall. This month, October, is in Sacramento. And then I'll go wherever I'm invited. So for example, if you guys were like, oh my gosh, can you come up and do one here? If I have a host of a company that wants to host it and then open up to the public, like I'll come up and do one. I just always want 32 people in the room to teach. And then I'll do it. So I'll go. And then sometimes companies are like, we don't want anybody else to be in our session. Will you just come and do it alone? I'm happy to do that too. So I go where I'm celebrated, not tolerated.
I like that. So talk a little bit about your new book then, and the difference between the Contagious Culture and Contagious You.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Contagious Culture was really focused on, the reason why people picked that book up is because it was about culture. And then the big surprise about Contagious Culture was that, as you saw, the first 3 parts of it, the culture is you. So that was really the learning. And then the last 2 sections of that book, I really dig into how do you do this with culture and how does organizational culture apply and all that good stuff. Well, what I noticed after writing Contagious Culture is there were a ton of questions, and then people kept asking me, can you write more about this? Can you do more? I was getting asked, like, can you do an IEP book for sales? Can you do an IEP book for marketing? Can you do an IEP book for educators? Can you do an IEP book for healthcare? Can you do an IEP book for navigating divorce? So I was getting all these requests. And I, in the last 4 years since Contagious Culture, I went and I worked with the Navy. I was in a think tank. I've worked with law enforcement. I've worked with more educators, like all these different pieces. And so I was trying to figure out, well, which book do I want to do next? And what I kept getting over and over and over again is that you're the common denominator. It's us. So it doesn't matter the industry. And so Contagious You now takes the contagious culture work even deeper. It's 95% brand new content. There's new models. There's a contagion factor formula. Now I've figured out like what is the actual formula in order to be contagious. Like how do you navigate that in a different way? The Contagious You has got an entire chapter of assessments. So there's 7 different assessments going into, are you George or are you Mary? What is the cost of negative energy on you? Like all these different pieces. It's got assessments that you can actually give your team, that your team can give you back. It goes into the science, because that was another piece, was that for the people that were like, I don't know, this is kind of still like out there. Great, we tackled that. I actually worked with a neuroscientist from UCSF, and we dug into the neuroscience and what is actually happening in the IEP methodology with our body and our physiology. Like, how is it that we're contagious? So there's that. I worked with a psychotherapist on this one because I really wanted to open up the discussion around mental well-being even more and talk about, there's a chapter in there called OPPPE, which is other people's problems, projections, and contagious expectations.
That's awesome.
And, you know, so I did that because like that's what you're talking about. You go in and somebody wants to suck the life out of you. Well, how do you navigate that? So there's that guy. And then the other thing with this book that I'm excited about is that I went back to organizations who've been integrating it. And I said, all right, you've had a couple of years now. How did it go? And it was really interesting because we asked 19 people to contribute. 18 people said yes. And I asked everyone to give me like 500 words. We had 16,000 words at the end of all of it. So that chapter is different companies and how they've used the content and how they've integrated it like really organically, anywhere from they've been doing it for a year to I think the longest was 5 years they've been doing it now. And then their best practices. So there's that piece. There's, oh my gosh, there's a ton. So the main difference, Margaret, is that contagious culture is a higher level, like definitely read this book for working with your culture, building your team, getting exposed to IEP methodology. Contagious You is going to get you even more deeply into it. And I wrote them so that they're best friends, they're BFFs, but they also both stand alone really beautifully. So you don't have to read Contagious Culture to get total value from Contagious You and vice versa. And I invite you to because they really do work nicely.
What was that again? Down with OPP what?
Yeah, OPPPE. It's other people.
Have you heard from Naughty by Nature about that yet?
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's, yeah. So it's, the other thing was this, is that a lot of people still would come up to me after I would do keynotes or going to work with groups, and they'd come up and they go, okay, all the soft stuff is great, but we want the list. Like, give us the culture checklist. And I go, no, there is no, like, your culture checklist is only as good as the IEP you bring to your culture checklist. If you're not showing up well and everyone's exhausting your company, I don't care how great your culture checklist is. So this book was written to support those people even more. There actually is an entire chapter with the culture checklist. Like, here, I actually give you 3 culture checklists. Here's 3 sets of different things you can do that are very tangible. However, they're going to be so much better if you're actually showing up as a positively contagious you. So it's for them. And then the other piece was that a lot of people after contagious culture started applying it, like you, Margaret, and totally got excited about it. And then they're like, but this guy or this gal or whoever is not doing it, and I'm exhausted. Like, how do I navigate this person still? So it's kind of like it's a guide and a resource tool and a lot of stories and a lot of different pieces to address all the questions that I've gotten since Contagious Culture.
And when does Contagious You come out?
Oh, thank you. November 15th. It is available. It is available for pre-order now on Amazon, Porchlight, Barnes & Noble, Indie Books, and anywhere where books are sold. There. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to see what people think if they go and read this book after listening to you, because I think I've integrated pieces of this idea into when I talk to people, when I coach people, when I teach, all these things. And like, I'm going to give a talk next week, and part of my title has the word secret sauce in it, which I know was in your book and the tools and the apps. And I remember seeing it and thinking, oh my God, this is what I try to describe to people, that if they don't get it, they don't get it. But there's a reason that it works. And I think the best way to show people is just literally to show people. So,
well, I really I can say as a business owner and a leader, I read a lot of business books. You reference Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Group, which is mandatory reading for anyone that joins our team.
Good.
And I can affect a lot of change, and I know how to create a culture. Like, I can manage that. I love with your books, though, it's every single person on my team, everyone's responsible for it, right? Like, it begins with me. It might begin with me, but it doesn't end with me.
Right.
And I like how your book makes it as accessible to everybody at every level.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate you saying that. I hope so. That was my intention. That was my intention for it. And I think that this next one, I think, is just going to do that even more, especially with the extra elements that have been brought in. And the other piece is that it's grown a lot. Like, I've learned a ton since Contagious Culture, you guys. Like, I wrote that book, and I have to say, I think Contagious You actually wrote me. So that book, there's one of my mentors says, an author should not be the same person they are when they start a book as when they finish it. And if they're the same person, that means they didn't work hard enough. They didn't do their best work. And I was really struck by that. And I will tell you, like, writing Contagious You, I don't feel like I wrote that. I felt like that book wrote me and guided me where I was supposed to go. And writing it alone, like, I remember finishing it and submitting the transcript, and I was walking upstairs and I was like, I'm different. Like, that book changed me in my own IEP and my awareness around things that I was not aware of when I wrote Contagious Culture. So I, and then the other piece was, there's like, I kept thinking, what's harder than writing your first book? It's writing your second book, and try not to make it the same thing. Because I really wanted them to be different, because I didn't want people to get contagious. What I didn't want to have happen is people go, oh, well, I already read Contagious Culture, I don't need Contagious You. Or, oh, I got Contagious You, now I don't need Contagious Culture. I really, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, like, I want people to read both of them, because they speak to two different components that are super important. But nothing in Contagious Culture, like, I didn't change my mind about anything Contagious Culture. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I had changed my mind, I'd be saying, just buy Contagious You and just do that one and forget Contagious Culture. No, I still stand there. It's just that there's so much more depth, but it's helpful to have the other piece too. Anyway, so I'm glad it was helpful to you.
Yeah. Well, we want to honor our time with you. Thank you, Anese. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for talking about your book and your ideas, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for having me on.
All right, we're back. I know you missed us.
Welcome back, everybody. Jesse Moore, Margaret Smith, here for your afternoon drive.
I want you to start first with your reaction and experience with Anese.
Why me?
Because I think I was most curious to see what you thought about this whole concept. And it makes me think back to previous episodes where we've talked about energy. And so I'm just curious, because I know it's one of the things that I think is really unique about us is our different perspectives and different things that we bring to the table. And so I'm just curious. It's all.
I'm being set up, everybody.
You're not set up right now. Oh my God.
She mentioned this book months ago, and then I just chose it. I just went with it. And it's all led to this. Then she conspired to have this person on our podcast.
Conspired.
And now it's all coming back to this, because one time we had a conversation about what's more important, sales or energy. And you couldn't let it go. You couldn't just let me have my answer.
No, it wasn't just that, really.
Oh, not just that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Here's how I feel.
Okay.
I thought she was brilliant on the interview, on the podcast. I thought her answers were brilliant. I think she's masterful with her subject. I think here's kind of the issue. I have a lot of preloaded judgments that I always have to combat. I have to combat it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Business books, I think one of the things, one of the stereotypes about business books that is true too often is they're too long. They're longer than they need to be for unnecessary reasons. This Contagious Culture was a thick book. There's a lot to it. They were simple ideas. And it wasn't repetitive per se, I just like it synthesized down.
I get it. Yeah.
And so I was a little apprehensive about this podcast. I was a little apprehensive about the interview. I think she's, like I said, I think she's brilliant. And so...
and seeing it delivered in person, for sure. I agree.
And I do want the audience to understand something. We talked to her after we stopped recording.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we talked about how it went and the questions and everything else. And I want the audience to understand something. How I ask questions, I know sometimes it seems awkward, maybe a little forced or off the wall. I do that intentionally because I want an authentic response. These people, these authors, they've been, how many podcasts has she been on?
Oh yeah,
dozens,
countless.
right?
Yeah.
And my father was an author, and I remember when he released a book and he did like radio interviews, he'd do like 3 to 5 a day for
And you
a
could ask
couple
the
weeks.
same questions over and over
Right,
again.
and
Yeah.
it's hard to stay engaged and interesting. And so I tend to ask the unscripted question
Yeah.
in an effort to get them a little unbalanced
Yeah.
so that we get an authentic
Yeah.
response. And I don't know why I felt the need to explain that. I think I do ask odd questions at times. And it also always relates back to our team and what we're doing and what we're experiencing. So let's talk about that for a second. I love our team right now. I always love our team because I love people.
Sure. Yeah.
And if you've made it through our
Through the
interview process,
yeah,
which is rigorous,
it means a lot.
it means that you're worth paying attention to and you're worth investing into. That said, I feel really positive about our team. And I feel like everyone's in the position they're supposed to be in. And now we just need to magnify, plus everybody up. So I like this idea. I like the concepts of the book. Again, for the reason that I said in the interview, which is you and I might be responsible for forming the culture and for policing it, but it doesn't end with us. And so I like that if someone wants to impact change in their life, then this book is a good candidate for you.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I think that's why I was attracted to it in the first place. When I got like one chapter in and I told her I was hooked, it was because that is what I see as the secret sauce. And so when I try to describe that to people, it's really hard for me to put into words. So again, whenever I find something in life, whether it be from an author or another podcast or something, I grab onto it because I'm like, this is the words that I've been searching for. And I do think we're in a place now too where I was really able to apply it to the team of people we have around us because it's different. I notice the difference.
Well, and I think anytime we add people that are talented and we see them succeed, you see them succeed at a rate that's unexpected. They're like
I'd agree
chia
with
pets after 3 weeks. You
Yeah.
don't expect there to be a full...
Because you haven't seen it in a while.
Right,
You
don't expect there to
Yeah.
be a full
like
thing
a
of
full head of hair. It
right?
just popped out like that. That's not what it's been
Right.
like recently.
But when you take talent and you put them in the right culture, man, it's like Miracle Grow.
It is. Yeah.
And so we've had some interesting talks with our team members recently, some interesting reflection, and we're having some tremendous growth on our team. And so it's exciting. But I don't want it to just be to 4 or 5 people. I want to do that to thousands of people eventually.
Yeah.
But you and I had the conversation where I'm like, hey, you know what? What we have is too special to keep this team small. Right? Like,
I agree. Like what she described about the corporations and things that she's going into and those that are not open to change. There's a whole crowd of people, and more than I can even imagine and number-wise, that are looking for something like this. And they will dedicate their lives and everything in their power, and they will dedicate their energy to contribute to something that they believe in.
right.
So
So here's a hack. I think this is a hack for us, and it's a hack for everybody else. And I think it's been happening. I think I've been more focused on this. But I'm really, you start the interview process, and I come in for a blink. Is what we coined it. I think really I'm just looking for an ounce of self-awareness or the possibility of self-awareness.
yeah.
And then I can embrace someone's quirks
Yeah.
or foibles. As long as I see the opportunity, fertile ground, But if I don't see that,
We can't take the time we don't have the ability, like Anese said, we don't have the ability to change someone.
Yeah.
And if they've not yet come into any sort of self-awareness, it's probably just not the right timing.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to Contagious You because I think it's probably, I think her passion for the subject, I think it gets a little distilled in Contagious culture because of the business. She's talking about the business globally.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas I think talking about the individual, you can really see her passion come out.
Totally, that's very true. I didn't think
And
about
I think
that.
it is going to make for a more powerful book.
That's a good point.
Just random thought. So there.
It was
Thoughts from
interesting-
you, Margaret.
Thoughts from me. I just get all the warm and fuzzies talking to her. She and I we got a good vibe going. We had an Instagram interview right after
Are
we
you
read
just
the
going to
book.
talk about how much you guys
Yeah, we
like
vibe.
each
Well,
other
it
and know
matters
each
to
other?
me. It matters to me. I don't know her
and
hardly
you're
at
forming
all.
a relationship?
Oh my God, no. We had one conversation, okay? All I'm just saying is that when I meet someone who understands it or gets it, I take note because not very many people get it. And especially around energy and intuition and all those things that I like to talk about, it means a lot to me because the more I surround myself with those people, the more I continue to understand myself. So, yeah, I've already talked to her about what it would be like to have her come out to Seattle for a workshop, all that stuff. I'm totally checking into. But I really liked having the opportunity to dig into her content with you because I appreciate, like you said earlier, you might ask some quirky questions, but you and I both are really good at asking questions. And especially together, I don't know why or exactly what it is yet, but that ability to ask in such a way where someone comes out with maybe a different answer or their ability to come out and just be themselves and really be authentic, what authentic really means and looks like. This was a really refreshing, unexpected conversation, I think. Like, I didn't know how it was going to go. I thought it was going to go well, but I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's smart, period. And she's passionate. Those two things
put together, yeah.
are powerful.
I like her background in working in sports, too, and really understanding how the body works. I think that's just adds more data to the...
Kinesiology.
Yes.
Is that the word?
Thank you.
I'm like, oh, goodness. I don't want to spell this word.
Yeah.
I know I don't have anything cool to say like that. Like, I have a background in equestrian
There you go.
wrangling.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's not many
It's
people
the
that can
same.
say that.
Yeah, well, it's true. Not many people can say they're gator wrestlers, but they exist.
Have you done that?
Wrestled a gator?
Yeah.
I've held a tiny alligator in my hands.
Yeah.
So it's like, it was an unfair wrestling match.
Okay.
I won easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was no contest. But now that alligator is probably doing well. It's probably doing really well.
It's probably doing
And
really well.
I don't think I want a rematch. I think I'm going to just let
let
my
it go, let it
championship
be.
belt stay on the wall.
Yeah. Good idea.
It can go for an interim belt if it wants, but it's not taking my belt.
Well,
Any parting thoughts?
no.
Wow.
I know.
How's that for content, everybody? Margaret has no parting thoughts. I, on the other hand, have several parting thoughts. Dear audience, I love you.
Oh.
I want to give you a hug.
Oh.
No,
I guess I do have one parting thought.
yeah.
Now that you say that. I'm going to put out in the next week or so a request for people to submit those voice memos that I've been mentioning on social media. So if you've been listening to our podcast, or even if you're not, this is the first time, what have you, I would really love to hear your response. So I'm going to put a question out there. I'm going to email it to our database and put it on social media. And it's going to be a question that I'm going to ask you to respond to in a voice memo, no longer than like a minute and a half, and send to me, which I can then compile into a podcast. So I'm only going to do it. I'm only going to compile it if I have at least, I think at the very least, 15 answers. So if you're interested in that, please keep an eye out for that and participate. Because
What kind of voice memos are you looking for, Margaret?
well, I'm going to pose a question, and I'm coming down to figuring out what the question will be, and I want our listeners to respond. I think it'll be really interesting to see and hear their perspective. So we have a very dedicated group of listeners, and then we have a new group that is just starting to find us right now.
established group of listeners. Be on the lookout for new listeners roaming the halls.
We're coming up on our 1-year anniversary.
Now is your chance to be on the podcast. You too can submit a voice memo. We don't know the topic yet, but look out. It's coming.
It's happening.
That's one of your favorite phrases. It's happening.
It's happening.
It's happening.
That's true, actually. It is.
It is.
Yeah, make it happen. It's happening.
I should reference something we said at the beginning of this podcast when I said that I said I was an invitation, something. And after the interview, we were just riffing and talking and in our energetic way.
Oh, I said, people want to be around you. People all the time are saying to me, you know, I'd love to just be in Jesse's presence. Can I have a meeting with him?
I hired you, so I don't have to talk to those people.
So I was telling Anese, it's amazing. I don't think you even grasp yet the full power of your presence and your energy. I don't think you do. I don't think you get it yet. And then she went on and riffed on how she felt in your presence. Mm-hmm.
And she called me an invitation.
Yeah, she made reference to kind of she felt like you were about to improv, like you were about to make a joke or say something smart.
Like an actor.
And then she said, but even now as you're sitting here, it's like you're inviting me to speak with you. I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic.
I think that is something I do, but I don't think it's an invitation.
What is it?
I think silence is one of our best tools, right?
But it's not just silence that you're doing.
It's active listening with silence.
Something else, though, too.
Oh, and and it's an eye of newt simmered over a cauldron on a full moon.
Oh, my God.
If you ingest it the night before an eclipse, then you invite the invitating
Is it a full moon
spirits
tonight or anything?
to come. I'm just super excited because I'm going on vacation.
Yeah, you
in
are.
Less
You are.
Than 90
I can tell
minutes.
you're like a little kid right now.
It's not even.
Are you packed?
Let's talk about this.
Let's talk about it.
Hey, you don't need a vacation to get away.
It's true.
To just let it all go. To drop your
Are you
work
a representative
behind.
now for Suncadia?
I should be.
You should be.
Clay Ellum should make me their poster child.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do a little family trip with two other families. So one of my favorite places on earth, Clay Ellum, Washington. It's only
sounds so magical.
It's an hour and a half east of Seattle, but it's mountains. They have 4 seasons, so that it's full of color right now with fall colors. There's a little crisp fall air
It's the best
when
time
you
to
wake
go.
up and when you fall asleep. You need a blanket or plaid,
Plaid blanket.
or wear flannel. And it just makes me think of fire pits and a tall glass of wine. And not working. So and it's a family trip. So I'm excited because we get to take the kids, and the kids really look forward to it. And it's been a place, my happy place since I got separated and divorced, and it's something I do with my kids, and I'm looking forward to it.
Had you ever been before then?
Not before I got separated and divorced. No.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, going back to what Anese said, it's funny to me that she said I'm an invitation because I think most people look at me and run the other way. So I think
that's because she really looked. I think sometimes people don't pause,
it's ironic. It's super ironic.
It is ironic. It's funny.
Because she said, you look like you might be good at improv or an actor. And I'm like, yeah, I act moody and ornery so that people won't talk to me.
I really need to work on that. I have way too many people talking to me. I need to just work on my resting bitch
and people
face.
walk right past my door and they go in and talk to you. And they walk right out and they don't feel the need to talk to me. And I'm celebrating that. I don't think I look like an invitation to those people. I think I'm inviting them to walk right past my door.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Well, enjoy Suncadia.
Hey.
Post a pic or two of a
I
fire
will.
pit or something for us, the rest of us of the world that's following you and what you're doing.
And have a good time editing this episode
Thank you.
together.
I will.
I appreciate
will.
your editing skills.
Hey,
You just make it all come together.
Boom.
You take out our quirky, awkward.
Actually, don't take out most of that.
No, there's a
There's a little bit.
There's a little bit. here and there.
Happy fall.
Hey, we're approaching our year anniversary.
Hey, we are.
It's happening.
October 25th.
Oh, wouldn't it be funny if the voice memo episode was in celebration of our 1 year anniversary?
That would be funny.
We need to give these people something to think about.
I agree. I know. So
for voice memos, what are you saying? What are you thinking?
So in my head, one of the suggestions I had from one of our listeners, who perhaps may have been a part of the team, asked. Oh gosh,
Hi, Sarah.
No.
Oh no,
Jillian.
She
said, "What do you wish you would have known in your 20s?" And so it just got me thinking, like, that's an interesting question. Or maybe, what do you wish you would have known at a certain point in your life? Or I've thought about, like, if I were wanting to hear from some of our listeners what they're dealing with and why they listen to our podcast right now, I would want to ask them, like, well, what's your biggest challenge right now? Like, what are you hoping to hear? What are you hoping to solve? Or, like, I don't know. I mean, these are the things that I've been tossing around my head for nearly a month now. So I'm just curious. What do you think?
Well, let's imagine that we are a girl about to go on a date. And
oh my God, what? Okay.
Just follow it with me.
Okay. All right.
And maybe we're married.
Okay.
To someone, I don't know, maybe 5 years-ish, let's
Okay.
say. And let's say we just got dressed up to go on this date.
Okay.
Maybe we had a kid in the past few years, you know. Maybe we're off our game a little bit. We're not sure. I don't know. I'm just saying that, and you're looking for validation. You're saying, you know what? Hey, you get dressed up, you put on the makeup, and you're getting dressed to the nines, and you go out to greet your husband and to get his feedback, and he says, what? Right? This podcast, we did our nails, we got a pedicure,
we did,
shaved our legs for this.
We did.
We got primped,
got our hair done,
tweezed. And we got our lashes done. Everything's taken care of. Yeah. And now we've put on the dress. And we've stepped out of the bathroom, and we're looking for voice memos from our audience.
Oh my God, I love it. Yes.
And if we're not saying, hey, do I look fat in this? It's more like, here I am. What you say next will greatly impact the rest of the evening.
I think this is having even more of an impact on me. Oh my God, because personally, my dating life. Yes. So, like, do we ask them specifically for, like, what are
we
like?
Can't be too pointed in the question, because then it goes into then you get false negatives, you get false positives.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that looks amazing.
Okay, so we've just stepped out of the bathroom, and we're asking you all to say to us what you will.
Right.
Well,
and don't tell us it looks better on the floor. Okay, it's on my body. Tell me how I look.
Yeah, I like it.
Tell me what's working.
High five. Hopefully I can put that in writing to really correctly guide our guests, but I might take this segment of just this podcast as a separate sneak peek and put it out there to really explain what we're asking for. Okay. If you're listening to this and you understand...
we can use that photo of me in drag. I'm just kidding. No photos exist.
There is no photo of you in drag. Yeah. If you're listening to this and you understood what Jesse just said, please put something in a voice memo and you can email it to me.
It'd be good if they came up with their own, like, analogy of what the podcast is to them.
An analogy.
Right? Like a Jesse analogy.
Yeah.
Like in your
Jesse-ism.
best Jesse way. Explain in a metaphor what this podcast has meant for you.
In a metaphor.
And then the other option is you can just tell us, we're walking out of the bathroom. You're going to tell us how we look.
Yes.
You can do that too.
Oh my God. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm here to contribute. I've been trying to talk to you about this. And like, you always come up with something brilliant. Out of bathroom. How do I look? I'm literally writing notes right now. Okay. I'm really excited.
And if you answer wrong, I'm closing the door. It's going to take 45 minutes of talking to get me out.
Oh God. It's got to be really good because I don't want to wait another 45 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
There's dinner reservations on the line.
Steak.
This is what it takes. This is what I'm talking about. Everything in life hangs by a thread.
It's just a thread.
By a thread of emotion. And you have to be conscientious of how you want to show up.
Yeah.
And what you're going to say to make sure the rest of the evening goes smoothly.
Yeah. This is a big deal. Oh God, I feel
Do not take this lightly.
Okay, that was brilliant.
The fate of our relationship.
That's the fate of everything. Everything. All right. And on that
Tally-ho.
note,
Tally-ho.
we can totally sign off and feel like we've done our job for the day.
Peace out.
Peace out.
Finally clickers.